Underway. I'll just show some slides. Can you just let me know when you can see the slides, please? You can see them? Thanks,
Yes.
Alana. Great, that was quick. All the way from Sydney to America in a nanosecond. That's great. All right, so today's all about the Avoid Improvise Drive. A little bit of housekeeping first up, just to show you the culture chart. So these are the last 7 weeks. So the one on the right is obviously this week's chart. Good to see the bulk of the people are really from the Avoid, at least on the Improvise side, are more Avoid this week. But you can see there for the previous 6 weeks, you know, there's been a really good cross-pollination of all of the 4 drives, which is really good. And what I'd encourage you to do is to, you know, make your contributions today. I'll stop every so often to allow, you know, questions and comments. And if you've got a different perspective, it makes the whole thing richer. And I'd say to you, whilst this is about the Avoid Improvise Drive, and for those of you who are Avoid Improvise, that's of course a great learning opportunity. But for the people who are improvisers, you either live with or work with Avoid Improvisers. So it would be good for you to learn about this direction as well, you know, for just understanding how to work more with people and diversity. So hopefully it's an engaging and insightful webinar for everybody. In terms of the other check-in or the other protocol that we always use, so the first thing we do is always look at the collective IDs of the group we're going to be working with, just for how that might tilt our approach. The second thing is to just check ourselves and everyone on the call as to where are you at today in terms of your own sense of being in stride. You know, so the green arrow represents you being in stride, and when you are in stride, we call that being at peak performance, and that you get all the things at the top of the chart then, you know, the peak performance, fulfillment, achievement, self-esteem, self-confidence, great health and energy. That's when people, you know, make their best decisions, feel like they're in the zone, as the athletes say, and really feel fulfilled in their life. But there are these forces that pull you off track, and they not only rob you of the things at the top of the chart, but you start to experience the symptoms of being either in distress or stress, whichever way you want to call it, along the horizontal axis there. And you can see if you're a little bit off track, it takes its toll on your behavior. It might be a temper, it might be swearing, might be attitude, laziness, procrastination. But as the tension builds up, it takes its toll on your health. And therefore, if there are symptoms around your health, you know, instead of taking medication, I would really encourage you to check in and sort of go, okay, on the scale of 0 to 10, where am I? Am I, you know, an 8, 9, or 10, or am I a lower number? And I can assure you that if you are 6s and below, it starts to show up in your health. In fact, even if you're a 7, but it's been around for a long time, it might even be taking its toll on, at least on your behavior in a significant way. But health does kick in eventually. And by getting back in stride, I've had many people over the years who've been able to, you know, get off medications, even for illnesses they thought they'd be, you know, struggling with for the rest of their lives, by being much more true to themselves. So I really encourage you to check in on this every day. That's what I do, and those of us on my team and all the black belts who have studied ID do this check-in just to make sure that we're giving our very best to the world and giving our best to ourselves as well. All right, so after this week, we are then going to be having a series of another 8 webinars on a variety of topics. So whereas these last 8 have been about deep diving into the ID in terms of the 4 instincts and the 8 directions, what we're going to be doing for the next 8 weeks is focusing on some of these topics you can see on the screen. So next week is going to be the week on ID combinations. That has been asked for a lot. So meaning each week now we're just focusing on one drive, or more the point, one direction of each drive. And people have been saying, yes, but if I'm a verifier and avoid improviser, how does that play out compared to, say, a verifier and an improviser? And can you have 2 drives? Like, can you be a verifier and an improviser, or are some drives mutually exclusive? And what is the difference with the intensity? So we're going to get into that, you know, more advanced discussion in our webinar next week. And then from there, I'm going to just watch the feedback as to when we deploy each of these other topics. But I know there's been a lot of discussion about relationships. There's been a lot of discussion around, can I coach people live on screen? I've already had a couple of volunteers who have said they've got various issues that, or, you know, they're at a point in their life where they'd love to get some coaching and they're comfortable to do it live on the webinar with all of us. So if you would like to be, you know, if you've got something you'd like to talk through live, rather than just interjecting, off the cuff, if you'd like to actually have it more like an interview where I can do some work with you on the webinar, please reach out to me and let me know at the end of this webinar, and I'll then factor that into how we structure and produce each of the upcoming webinars. So I anticipate we're going to have a couple on peak performance coaching. There'll be several on relationships. That's been really popular. Stress is another one that people have been asking about. And then of course, communication. So exactly when we deploy them, I'll announce them more when we get into next week, because we're just structuring the layout of those based on the feedback and the volunteers that we get for people wanting to participate in the live interviews. So if you are interested, please let me know, and we'll then put that into the framework for the next 8 weeks. Just before we kick on, are there any questions or comments that anybody has before we start, or anything you'd particularly like me to cover today before we get underway? Just remember, you might be on mute. Okay, with that, I'm going to just show a slide here on the Improvise drive, and then we'll start to unpack the drive. So I've showed this visual last week of, if the Improvise drive is all about energy, basically, the improvisers are like the fireworks going off, in different directions. They thrive on the electricity, the animation, the passion, the excitement, the buzz. That's what drives the improviser. The avoid improviser is much more into the stability and the dependability of, we use the sun rising and setting here to sort of say there's just this absolute reliability. And in fact, a lot of avoid improvisers will say, I don't like being in the spotlight. And I thought the sun was a great example, because even when it's cloudy and you can't see the sun, we all know the sun still rises and it still sets. It's that reliable. And that is probably a great metaphor for the avoid improvise drive. So I'm going to unpack this drive for you, talking about, the different traits of that drive, and then what motivates and demotivates the drive, what the strengths and vulnerabilities are, how people often perceive this drive. And then of course, we'll get into the things that cause stress, some strategies, and as we've done with each of the other weeks, the genius elements of this drive as well. So with that, I will stop sharing and we'll get underway. And then what I'm about to share with you will all be posted up on our website later today, both the recording and also the slide that I'll populate with everything I'm about to share. It'll include probably some of the inputs that you guys have as well, because I'm, this is sort of incorporating 30 years of experience, but I'm well aware that some of you might have some nuances that you could add in today that will then factor into the slide and post later today. All right, so let's talk about the traits. So if the avoid improvise drive is all about energy, and we said before, the improvisers are sort of the fireworks that can go off, in all directions and, situations. One of the traits, if you just think about what are the traits of the avoid improvise drive, the first one that comes to mind is that they're very grounded. They're the people who are emotionally even keeled. They don't tend to be the, animated, erratic, high and low, extreme sort of emotional person. They're much more stable. I remember doing some work with the Melbourne Ambulance Service. Oh, it's got to be like 15 or more years ago. And every single person, we did about, it was over 100 people. It might have been several hundred people. I can't remember the number. It was definitely more than 100 people. And every single person was a 2 or a 1 in improvise. And I remember thinking, wow, even like a 5 in improvise was too much. But I think it just attracted, and now having met a whole bunch of paramedics here in my hometown and knowing their IDs, I think, to turn up to a situation that's incredibly emotional for someone like myself and be able to have this diligence and calmness and stability of being able to just get on with the job, regardless of all of the other drama and emotion going on around you, that is the hallmark of this avoid improvise drive. So the sense of being grounded and very even keeled and stable emotionally is not only a trait, it's actually one of the strengths that they really bring to the table. They're the people that have logic over emotion. Logic is what rules. And that's why the avoid improvisers absolutely hate being sold to, because that pressure, that emotion, it's like, just leave me alone. I've got my own brain. I've got my logical thinking that can determine whether or not I need to buy or not. And that's why, when I think of stories that bring the ID to life, If you're an avoid improviser and you walk into a shop and somebody comes up and says to you, "Can I help you?" Straight away, there's this change that occurs inside you. It's like, okay, if you're just being nice, that's okay, but don't ask me anything more, you know? And then if they say to you, you say, no, I'm good, thanks, I'm just looking. And then they drop the clangor of a question like, oh, what are you looking for? Can you feel in your body there's this change where you want to turn around and just go straight back out the door because you just feel pressure building up inside you, this emotion, and you don't want that. So the easiest way to reduce the pressure is to leave. Whereas to an improviser, when someone talks to you like that, it's like, oh, great, someone's talking to me. They can help me. It's like fun and it's interactive. So what one person sees as fun, the other person sees as pressure. And you don't ask it to happen. It just is what happens instinctively within you. Similarly to if I said to an improviser, I think I used this example last week, can I ask you a favor? The improviser, I've only got can or can I out of my mouth, and the improviser's going, yes, absolutely. And the avoid improviser is like, well, tell me what the favor is. And once I know what it is and I can see whether I can do it, I'll let you know whether it's a yes or a no. But they need to know first before they declare their answer. And that's because one of the traits of the avoid improvise drive is to deliver the goods. And you're not going to make a promise about something if you are unsure or uncertain as to whether or not you can deliver it. That's why you tend to take things seriously. The improvisers, you know, it's interesting. I had, there's a lot of this, I guess initially there was a lot of conjecture as to, are the improvisers the more extroverted people? Are they the fun party people, etc.? And it's like, well, you've only got to watch an avoid improviser. When it's time to party, whatever they do seriously. And I've seen some pretty crazy avoid improvisers when it's time to party, because whatever they do seriously, whether it's cooking, whether it's partying, whether it's working. But the thing is, when in their mind they're working is about being diligent. And so mucking around, laughing, making noise, playing music, all of these things that can be, you know, more in the fun side of things and distractions from working and being diligent, they're really annoying to an avoid improviser. But to an improviser, they sprinkle it all in together. There's not really a clear line between work and fun. They just, you know, work is fun. You want to make work fun. But to the improviser, to the avoid improviser, it's about separating work from fun. And when it comes time to have fun, I'd just say to you, look out. If in the mind of the avoid improviser it's time to party, they'll leave the improvisers for dead. So, you know, they're just a few of the traits that I would say are really significant and very apparent in the avoid improviser. Oh, the other one I mentioned was I want to cover decision making, because decision making to an avoid improviser is a really serious thing. Like, you make decisions to make them permanent. Like, you don't buy a car to sell a car a couple of weeks later. You don't buy a house to move again a couple of weeks later. You're going to be, this concept of permanence that's part of the stability. That's a big part of the avoid improvise drive. Whereas I know many improvisers who have bought a car and sold it within a week, bought a house and moved within 3 months. You know, it just, it was a decision. Started in a role. In fact, even before they started in a new role, they've already moved from that role to another role. It's a decision is more just a stepping stone for an improviser, but it's much more, it's a much more permanent, you know, issue for an avoid improviser. So decision making is a big deal to an avoid improviser, especially what we would all consider to be the bigger decisions, you know, houses, investments, marriages. You know, it's a big deal. So many avoid improvisers over the years have said to me, but how do I know this relationship is the right one? I'm taking a massive risk here. You know, how do I know if it's really true love? You know, all these sort of questions, because they want it desperately to be permanent and not run the risk of having to change it again down the track. All right, I'm going to stop there and just let anyone either comment or ask questions.
So this is Patricia, and my husband's a 2 in this drive. I'm a 7. And for the longest time, when his mom would call and say, hey, can you come by the house and change a light bulb? And he would say, let me get back to you. I would be pissed, because I would think, that's a big fat no to me. Yeah. The answer is yes. And then you figure it out after you get off the phone. And now that I understand his ID, he gets off the phone. I can now see him thinking, okay, I have to go to the store and pick this up. I get off work at this time. And he'll call her back like in 10 minutes and say, I'll be there Wednesday at 2. Or whatever time. And it just, now I understand that, but it does. It's not an immediate yes. It's let me get back to you, even for fun stuff.
Yeah, because it's a decision.
Yep.
You know, it's a big deal. And it all comes into this place of whatever they commit to, they will absolutely deliver. They take that so seriously. A commitment is a huge issue to an avoid improviser. Thanks, Patricia. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Hi, everybody. How's it going?
Hey, Andy.
Some faces are definitely familiar, so hello. No, but what you were talking about earlier, Paul, about, you know, the really big decisions, I think that's what it hinges upon, is that it feels so big that, like, you really want to weigh everything, because again, like, you don't want to make the wrong decision, because then you have to start the process all over again. And some of my coworkers know that I've had to, like, get a new car. I know I need to, but I've been saying that for the past year because I keep doing more research and like, oh, well, the new models are going to come out, or when do I buy it? And it really shouldn't be that big of a deal, but it's a new car that I'm planning on having for the next 20 years. So here we are. And I know Patty's on the phone somewhere, and she's probably laughing because she knows how much I've been spending on it. So a lot of what you're saying has really resonated.
Yeah, it's a great example. Thanks, Andy. I had a friend of mine, I don't know whether Ramos is on the call, but one of his close friends was buying a car, and he had an idea like yours, and he did this whole spreadsheet on all of the cars. It took him, like you said, it took ages to sort of figure out what car is going to be in that bottom right-hand cell that says that is the car to buy. And right before he made a decision, they upgraded one of the models, and he had to start basically all over again. You know, it was just like, it was real. For me, it was a really funny experience. For him, it was so frustrating.
You know, what's funny is that I also have a spreadsheet. Like,
right.
I swear it's the verify, though. It's not just the point improvise.
That's right. That's right. But well, they all go together. We'll probably talk about some of those combos, you know, next week. Okay, so let's move on and talk about what do you need to get motivated? If you're an avoid improviser and you're, you know, wanting to be that 8, 9, or 10 out of 10, what do you need to be motivated? I'm going to share some things with you that might surprise you, actually. So the first ones that are not probably the surprise are you need certainty. The very first thing is certainty. Certainty is a huge ingredient of what makes the avoid improviser tick. Another one is obligations and responsibilities, because they're part of the commitment factor that you want to make sure you deliver on. So being clear on whatever has been promised or committed to, or whatever the obligations and responsibilities are, they're huge. But I'd also say what you need to be aware of are the fears, the risks, and the pressure. Not because risks motivate you, but they motivate you to stay away from them. And sometimes we do things because we're trying to escape from it rather than what we're drawn towards. So even being clear on, well, what are the risks? Because I know many avoid improvisers have taken action or even taken risks to avoid a greater risk. And so being clear on what the risks, the fears, the pressures are can often help define where do you need to go to get that certainty, which could include taking a risk or making a decision that you're still uncomfortable about, but it will cause less pressure, less stress, less risk than staying where you are. And often when you're in a place of inertia, which is a place that avoid improvisers can get to because of that risk factor, if you just think about, but what's the risk of doing nothing? And then expand on that, you know, whether it's a financial consequence, whether it's a stress consequence, a health consequence, a personal brand consequence. But often when you expand on the risk of doing nothing, that becomes a much greater risk than the risk of showing initiative. I just saw an email from a CEO friend of mine who we're working with, and he made a really beautiful statement in this email. I think he could well be on the call, I'm not sure. And he said, no one will get fired for taking risks and showing initiative. We might adjust compensation if they continuously fail, but we're not going to fire anyone for showing initiative and taking risks. You know, that's to encourage this strong avoid improvise culture to get more innovative and to take action. What else do you need? You need diligence and a quiet, calm environment. When you're really trying to do your best work, getting away from the noise. And this is interesting because in the last 10 years with this shift to more collaborative workspaces, it's interesting to me the people who are making the decisions about the collaborative workspace versus the people working in the collaborative workspaces. And I can assure you there are many, many, many avoid improvisers who loathe that collaborative workspace because there's no privacy. Then it's not that they're doing anything secretive. They just want solitude. They want to get away from not only, even if there's not noise per se, there's people moving around and it's distracting. Whereas an office allowed them to create what to them in their mind was this diligent environment. It's the improvisers in many cases who are saying, oh, wouldn't it be fun to have this collaborative workspace where we can be all out there together and we can be bantering and brainstorming? How fantastic would that be? And a lot of the avoid improvisers, in order to not look the fool or to look like a wet blanket, went along with it because of the risk of not going along with it. But now years down the track and they compare their productivity, you know, they can see that in many cases they're better off working in solitude. So now you bring in 2020 where we're working from home, forced to work from home, and how many people are saying, oh, I'm so much more productive. If anything, I've got an issue now with personal boundaries because I get into work and I can achieve so much. And that's become the new issue, is creating the personal boundary. But it's really vindicated, I guess, a lot of the frustration that many of them have felt around trying to work in these collaborative workspaces. What else do you need? You need to know that the results are going to be sustainable. Improvisers don't mind, as I said about buying houses, chopping and changing and moving on to new things all the time. But permanence and sustainability are big drivers for the avoid improvisers. So if you want to get motivated, you need to see that what you're going to be doing will have some level of permanence and sustainability to it. And the last one is realistic timeframes, because when people particularly have delegated work to you and they've made promises on your behalf about what things are going to get done, that's very frustrating, particularly if the timeframe's not realistic. You know, if I make a promise that we'll get something sorted in the next hour or so, and I go and lump that onto somebody else and they've already got their day plan, and particularly if it's an unreal, it's not just an interruption, but I'm saying something can get done in an hour that's really going to take a day, that type of pressure is really inconsiderate and unfair and stressful to an avoid improvise person. So you need, you know, all of those things I just mentioned to really be at your best. And if you use this like a checklist to make sure you got them in place, you can then see, okay, where are some things missing and who do you need to talk to or what do you need to do to get that turned around? What demotivates you? If you're an improviser, what demotivates you? Constant improvising. It's interesting. A lot of avoid improvisers will say, but I can improvise. It's like, yeah, you can improvise, but it's not what you instigate of your own volition. It's something that you can do when you have to. I mean, if you lock your keys in the car and you've got to improvise and go and get an Uber or call a friend and yeah, of course, we all have to do that. But do you put yourself into these situations in order to create the buzz and the fulfillment of, you know, just figuring out how do I pull a rabbit out of a hat? No, the avoid improviser can do it occasionally when it's needed, but to live like that or to be in an environment where there's just continuous improvising, that is really frustrating and demotivating. Another phrase that I hear a lot of is flavors of the month, because whereas improvisers love the shiny new toy or the shiny new object, as I'll often say, and get attracted to that like, you know, moths to a flame, the flavors of the month notion is really belittling, and it's almost dirty to an avoid improviser. They would rather stay with what's tried and tested. There's less risk there. Hype, like being sold to, and all the you know, big noise, the raving on that avoid improvisers can hear from an improviser, that's a total demotivator. I remember one of our leaders one time, our clients, gave this, what he thought was this fantastic, visionary, inspirational speech. And then he went into the restroom afterwards and he was in the cubicle and a couple of other guys were in there and they didn't know that he was in the cubicle. And I was saying, so what do you think of Scott's speech? And they went, you know what? All I heard was blah, 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 blah. Because the minute you have, and it wasn't so much the words, it's even just the energy. Once there's this animation and passion and excitement about whatever the possibilities were that he was talking about, it just sounds all like blah, blah, blah to an avoid improviser. But start talking with logic and facts and substance and the certainty of what you're going to do, and put some specific things on the table that people can sort of like attach to and ground themselves with, that sound much more realistic. Okay, now you've got my attention. And that's why often if you're talking with, for example, a group of engineers, many of whom would be, you know, avoid improvise, it's one thing to hear the vision, but then it would be very smart to have an avoid improviser almost translate it into engineering language and say, guys, so what this means in our language, and they speak in, for me, it's almost like a foreign tongue, to then ground all of that and have it be something that they can all connect with and relate to. What else demotivates you? Group settings. You know, that, like I said about the collaborative workspace, or meetings, even meetings where you've got 10 or 12 people in a room. You've got to go to the meeting, but is it your best place to be? Is it where you do your best thinking, your best work? Often your best thinking occurs after the meeting. And so it'd be very smart for a leader who is working with a group of avoid improvisers to provide that second meeting afterwards to say, guys, we've covered a lot today. Why don't you use tonight to think about it? And why don't we reconvene tomorrow just for 10 minutes? So if anyone's got any questions or any other things you think about, we can then work them through. And it's quite interesting how many of the best ideas, the best thoughts, the really important and concerning questions will occur away from the heat of the moment rather than under that pressure. Even formality. I mean, I think about things like job interviews. If someone said, like if I was interviewing someone who was an avoid improviser and I said, I want you to come in for a job interview. Whoa, now we're talking pressure. But if I just said, you know what, before we worry about a job interview, why don't we just have a coffee and just have a chat and get to know each other and make it sound less formal and more friendly and therefore less pressure? That makes it a much better interview, because I'm sure many avoid improvisers have had that experience where you get asked questions and when you feel this pressure and you're thinking, oh, I know the answer, I just can't think of what it is right now. And the minute the interview's over and you walk out, your mind just gets flooded with all these answers and you're thinking, why couldn't I think of this in the moment? But it's because of the pressure that was there. And so keeping the situation more informal and friendly and less pressured frees your mind to be able to contribute all that it can. I'm going to stop there and let you ask questions or comment, or for the avoid improvisers to keep processing.
Hey, Paul, it's Grant. How you going?
Hey, Grant, great.
I just wanted to check. So is there an appearance of procrastination with avoid improvisers, even though they might be thinking through in logic and
right,
wanting to make sure they understand risk? Is there an appearance of procrastination to improvisers?
Yes, and not just procrastination. So it's one of the vulnerabilities of the avoid improvise drive is that when you're thinking it through, but you don't say that, you know, it's this, it leaves an improviser, not just an improviser, but the other person in the conversation is left feeling with, what have I just really, you know, annoyed you and irritated you or aggravated you somehow? Or it can look like when there's just a shutdown and you're totally shut down because your mind is like totally engaged thinking it all through. It looks like we've really pissed you off, you know, and you're shutting down, you're disengaged, and it's like, hello, where are you? And I've had situations like that where I'm like, okay, did I just say the wrong thing? And the person goes, no, I'm just thinking it through. I'm like, okay, next time, can you just tell me that you're thinking it through? Because I'm sitting here freaking out, thinking that I've said something that's really offensive, and you know that's not the case. So what's helpful is just to share what you're processing. You know, an avoid improviser doesn't want to speak up until they're certain, that word again, until they're certain that what they're saying is right or sensible, you know, or a true reflection of what they're thinking and feeling. But just say that. Just say, I'm just thinking it through.
Yeah.
I'll be back soon. Okay, fine. I can keep driving along or, you know, doing other work or whatever it might be, but at least you know that the person hasn't been offended or isn't disengaged.
Yeah.
Hey, Paul.
Thank you.
This is Larry.
Hey, Larry.
So a question in the avoidance, if you will, or not reactive, is how much is it situational sometimes? Because obviously in the office, I'm not particularly a big impromptu person, but there are other environments where I play music and stuff. I love it that I don't know what we're gonna do. You know, it can be really fun to. So it's different situations, but I would say I go from a 2 to a 9. You know,
that's a great question. What do you think it is, Larry? When you given that you are an avoid improviser, do you feel like you're being caught off the cuff and taking risk, or do you feel like you've got a repertoire that you you know, you almost pride yourself being able to call on in a moment's notice?
I think I probably feel a little off the cuff, but it's more fun.
Okay. Okay. Are you confident that you can pull it off?
Oh, not always, never.
Really?
No.
Okay. Are you drunk when you do it?
No. 99%
No.
of the time it's in church, so no.
Maybe a bit too much altar wine. Yeah, look, it could just be your sense of fun. I mean, it doesn't mean you can't have fun. It's interesting. We could, if we unpack it enough, there would be an answer that fits with your avoid improvise drive. I'm not sure exactly what it would be right now. I don't know whether anyone else on the call has got that same experience and they can see where it fits. Is there anyone else who's an avoid improviser that say there's times when I do things like Larry's talking about? Yeah, Claudia.
Yeah, more related to what Larry said. I used to play in an orchestra, and we would sometimes, so most of the times we played by notes, which you could practice, but sometimes we just sort of jammed for fun. Just a small group of us, and you never knew exactly what was going to come out of it, and it was just being part of it rather than actually, you know, kind of being on the sidelines.
Okay.
And it did kind of stretch me, and I think possibly the use improvise has come out of that for me. It's kind of that stretch. I got used to the stretch, and I don't know if Larry can relate to that, in the sense that you do kind of stretch yourself to do something that takes you out of your comfort zone. And yeah, but it's taking the fun seriously, as you said before. you know, kind of like.
Paul, it's Ian. I was just going to say one of the things that I think is also is what's the risk about it? I mean, for myself, if there's no risk of making a fool of myself, or it doesn't matter if I make a fool of myself, then I'll have a go at anything. But if you're in a situation where it's serious, you know, sort of, you know, then you're much less likely to speak up or to have a go at something. But I think in Claudia and Larry's situations where they're probably, you know, what's the worst that's going to happen? There's no risk, really.
That's a great point, Ian. And I do know that now that Larry and Claudia share what they've shared, there are a lot of avoid improvise that will say, you know, I know that I've had to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. You know, that being stretched. Everyone likes to grow. That a human need is to grow. And for a lot of avoid improvisers, they know that some of their best growth occurs when they're out of their comfort zone. And so maybe there's a part of it where you voluntarily put yourself into some stress. It's it's sort of somewhat out of stride, but it's fun because you know there's a growth element. And maybe to your point, Ian, if there's not too much of a risk, you know, maybe that helps as well.
And Paul, kind of along the lines of what Ian was saying, like the bigger risk is to miss out on something. And that's kind of what came to mind for me when Larry was talking, and then kind of reinforced when Claudia was talking, that like that maybe there's not a lot of risk other than that you would miss out on this thing that you're passionate about or having fun with. Okay.
Yes, we all remember you at our improvised session a couple of years ago, Sarah. It was really funny. We did this as a team. We did this it was the improvisation session, and everyone was basically doing things off the cuff with the, you know, team leader, and all the improvisers wanted to run and hide, and the most avoid improvised person in the room, Sarah, was the superstar. You know, it was quite shocking actually to all of us as to how the tables turned. But when it came to having the fun, it was certainly your time to have the serious fun, wasn't it?
I wasn't going to miss out.
Hey guys,
Okay.
I was just going to say the visualization between the void and use improvise, I just am visualizing Penn and Teller. Like Penn is this animated, you know, excited magician, right? And then there's Teller, who's very like diligent and logical and he plays it down. He's not, you know, animated. But he looks like he's not engaged, right? But he's just actually trying to think about.
Who is that, Jess?
Penn and Teller.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. I should check them out. They could be a great example of explaining that drive. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Paul, I was just about to add something too, just quickly. I've noticed that when people are in a situation they're very comfortable with, like a workplace, they know the other people around them very well, or where they're in a situation where they know the subject matter very well or they're very passionate about it. That's when I find that avoid improvisers can really step out and be quite bold.
Well, that's true. I mean, one of the biggest risks when you think about, you know, the fears. In fact, one of my sections I was going to talk about was what are the voices. There's issues of self-doubt for every drive or every direction of every drive. And one of the biggest ones for the avoid improvise drive is fear. And it's the fear of failure, the fear of embarrassment, the fear of looking a fool, you know. And so if in the environment, like you often see people be much more animated at home where they know the relationships, they know they're not going to look a fool, everyone knows them inside and out. So they're one type of person. And when they get out in an environment where they're not as well known, then there's much greater risk there, you know. So if you are in environments that you feel much safer in, whether it's the band or the church or whatever it might be, maybe the context of that environment is safer and therefore less risky, and you are able to do things that are not only off the cuff but real fun, you know. There'll be something. And Larry, if it's something you want to keep talking about, I'm happy to talk with you more about it offline too. Let's move along to talk about some of the strengths and then the vulnerabilities of this drive. So when it comes to strengths, the first thing is risk identification and mitigation. And I say risk, but I also mean pressure, because I think that one of the big things that the avoid improvise does is identify where there's pressure. And that's a bit of a different phrase to risk, you know, but it's in the same category. A lot of times the issue within a team, for example, is the pressure that the team's feeling. It may not be risk, but the source of the pressure and then what to do to mitigate it is where the avoid improviser naturally goes to. And it's interesting because what I would say to all of you avoid improvisers is it's not an obvious thing to an improviser. The very thing that you can see as a risk can be seen by an improviser as fun and exciting and an opportunity. And we honestly don't realize that it could be putting a ton of pressure on other people. Like even something brand new, you know, that's going to be something that's fun and like socially a party that we want to throw, that to some people be like, you know, do you know the pressure that like that person's just been through a really bad personal situation and the pressure they'd be feeling about coming out? Like they'll point out things to you that it's like, oh, so wasn't there. I was just thinking of how much fun we were all going to have and how exciting it would be. I wasn't breaking it down and thinking of the individual pressure that might be put on each and every person. So that's one of the, and then what to do to mitigate that in a way that doesn't put more pressure on is one of the real strengths of that drive. The second huge strength is delivering on commitments, you know, rain, hail or shine. It's like, not only do you deliver whatever it takes from you personally, but regardless of how exciting and sexy the task is, you do it. Whereas I can assure you that for improvisers, unless there's something energizing about the task, they just can't do it. It's not that they won't do it. It's not a, you know, an intentional procrastination. They just can't get motivated to do it when their energy is drained or when there's no energy about that particular task. So that's why they often get it done at a deadline, because the deadline then provokes or creates the energy. It wasn't so much that they're deadline driven, they're energy driven. If it had been more positive and more fun, they would have been able to do it sooner. But in the absence of those things, they needed the deadline. For an avoid improviser, when there's tasks that are just boring tasks, there's nothing sexy, there's nothing fun, there's nothing exciting, there's no big reward, they've just got to get done, like making kids lunches every day or cleaning the house or mowing the lawn or, you know, whatever the task might be that's just a task. The avoid improvise can do it and do it really well. It's not so easy either to do it or do it well for the improviser. Producing quality that doesn't need to be sold or have hype and put the spin on it. You know, the avoid improvisers are the people that say, I want the results to speak for themselves. So they produce a level of quality that is just really classy, so that without any promotion, just by observing, you know, or experiencing, think of like test driving a Tesla or a Mercedes-Benz or a really nice car like that. You don't need people to sell it to you. By you just experiencing the sheer quality of and performance of that product, you sell yourself. If you go and buy certain clothing that is of top quality, you don't need someone telling you how good it looks on you. You can just like do all that yourself because of the quality of the product. That is the standard that the Avoid improviser wants to deliver. Whereas so often for an improviser, you know, they could sketch something together and it's 70% there. But they're like, I'll use my charisma and personality to sort of sell the rest of it, and I'll get it through. And there's a time and place for all of that. But it's the Avoid improviser talent to deliver a standard and a quality that doesn't need the spin. And I'd say the other thing is when you've got to make really serious decisions that do need to be considered and need to be seen to be considered, like I mentioned, some of the really significant decisions being made today with COVID, whether that be by government or by, you know, in workplaces, the sorts of decisions you're making around the health and safety and well-being, not only of your employees, but you've got all your customers and you've got, you know, stakeholders that have to be considered. And, you know, they're really serious issues. And there's a lot to be thought through so that whatever you're doing, you can't just make a decision today and then sort of go in a week's time, oops, got that wrong. We need to make a quarter turn over here. There needs to be something more thought through. That's where the Avoid Improvise, having them on the team, and I'm not saying them exclusively, it'd be great to have a diverse team, but that's the contribution that they're going to bring to the table. So risk mitigation and reduction, reducing the pressure, keeping the emotion and the drama out of the situation, and being able to act regardless of the drama and the emotion going on around you with that emotional stability, producing the quality, and, you know, making those enduring decisions. They're all really hallmark strengths of the Avoid Improvise Drive.
Hey, Paul, I have a question for you actually on one of those last points about kind of keeping out the drama and just being like very logical about whatever needs to happen. I've personally received feedback that when I tackle a problem, I come across as uncaring because I'm like, just the facts, ma'am. Like, here's the situation, here's my proposed solution, let's just go through it. Do you have any advice on how to soften that without generating fluff? Because that's one thing that I know I won't be able to do is add fluff into a situation when we're just trying to problem solve.
Well, I'll share a thought and then maybe let others share as well. There might be other people who have, similarly to you, Andy, like with a similar idea, have had that feedback and found a way around it. I would say for the people that I know, and I'm thinking of someone right now, they just speak to it. They just say, like, I get the emotion. I have that. I have all that feeling. I'm like the duck, you know. I'm calm on top. Underneath, a lot's going on, but I just want to deal with the facts. So it's just acknowledging that the emotions are there. You don't have to do anything more than that. I think if you just acknowledge it, it shows people that you do actually, you are human. You do have emotion. It's just you're putting them to one side.
Paul, could I jump in on that one? Because I live with two and improvise, and my daughter's a 3. And I find that the situation they handle is really with that focus you've been talking about and not getting into the drama. But if you can take it like a stone in a pond, they vibrate a lot longer afterwards. Like it has more of an impact on them when it's an upsetting situation or a really demanding one. And they're carrying it a lot longer than I will be. I'll be wondering while they're still on it. And it's like, it's not over yet, you know, and I have to learn to give them that ripple time, I call it. So otherwise my shoreline's going to get a wash.
What a great point, Greg. I mean, I just think of, you know, I just know, I won't say who, because, but I know paramedics who have been in really horrible situations and they're very calm in that moment. But when they come home from work or they've got that 5-day break afterwards, you know, there's so many people now from there and think of the military as well, and PTSD, you know, where you talk about the ripple effect. It can go on for a long time where a lot of that emotional state they've had to put to one side. It's a great metaphor, Greg. You know, it lingers for a long time. Trace, you're on mute.
Okay, I'm here. related to that, it's interesting. I had just texted Sarah earlier about this. Is I've talked to a lot of clients recently who are avoid improvise, who that pressure piece, right? It's a strength, but it also can be a big vulnerability because of the pressure that they kind of absorb, you know, and it goes to Greg's ripple time, but it's a little bit different. And what I find is, you know, we say in the moment they seem even keeled, they're the rock, right? And if you ask them what's going on, they're like, it's a duck in water, right? Where they're like in their head, they're not even calm, they're not even keeled and calm. And even more so with a team environment, leaders with this kind of absorb the pressure from the rest of the team. And so they're maybe not delegating or handing things out when they should be. And there's a lot of pressure that can get like absorbed into that drive. So I'm curious other people's experience of that or strategies that would be helpful, because I think that pressure can be a very heavy weight on the avoid improvise.
That's a great point, Trace. Is there anyone who is an avoid improviser on the call who's found a really good way that they can deal with that level of pressure and it doesn't then build up? Have you found a strategy that you can use to, whether it's compartmentalize it or deal with it somehow? Claudia.
I'm not sure if it's the verify kicking in with me, but I guess because we are even keel, I don't think we show the pressure. And with the verify, I kind of dissect things. Like the quick analysis helps me kind of focus on what's the immediate thing that needs to be dealt with.
Mm.
And I'm not sure if that's the verify kicking in. Maybe someone else with a different,
Okay.
like with a avoid verify can speak to it.
Okay, thank you. Michelle.
Yeah, so one of the things I think, so my two strongest drives are the authenticate and the avoid improvise. So I am even keeled 98% of the time, and even under pressure. But where I go to is I need my exercise. I need that physical outlet to kind of really to get that pressure under control. Most of like I can really handle it as long as I have that, which is hard right now because it's so hot here and the gyms are closed. So right now I'm super struggling. Yeah. So my stress level is, yeah, I'm probably about a 3 right now. So yeah.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
That's a great point though. So you're leaning on your other drives to then try and sort of balance out the pressure.
Yeah.
Okay. If anyone has any ideas, either put them in the chat or, you know, jump in and contribute them. I'm well aware of the time. So I want to talk about, just so I don't miss it. And then what I will do is if there's some important points we don't get to cover within the hour, I will make a separate video and post that as a bonus session from this one, just to cover those things for you to get. We'll just see where we land. But I do want to talk about the vulnerabilities of this drive. And then I'll talk about the genius component. So the vulnerabilities, the first one that comes up, and I'd say this is, I think it'd be good, I could safely say, I've never found an avoid improviser who hasn't said, you know, yep, this is me, is the self-promotion piece. They just are not good at it and they frigging hate it. You know, having to sell themselves is just not their cup of tea, as it were. And I've honestly, I've never met anyone that said, no, I love doing that. And it's not that the improvisers love self-promoting. They just don't even think of it as self-promoting. They just think of it as sharing, talking, sharing their excitement, you know, whatever it is, about themselves or about others. There's plenty of avoid improvisers who have said, oh, I have no problem, you know, selling other people and like promoting other people and talking about my kids or my team. But when it comes to talking about myself, that's, oh, no, I just can't go there. It just defies who I am. So that is one of the vulnerabilities, because if you follow the sort of logic of it, the logic is that their idea is all about the results speak for themselves. The problem is, in the world we live in, not everyone is listening or looking for your results. Even if you work for them or live with them, they're still not, they're so consumed by their own thinking and their own issues. They're not really looking out to see what you've done and how you've done it and how good it is. So unless you point that out to them, they don't really stop and process it and join the dots to say, wow, that was awesome. You know, they might even hear what you've done, but have no sense of what it took to get there or what the impact was for the client or the other person. They just don't think. They just say thank you and move on. And so until you or some mechanism sells that or you know, puts the color into it, they're not going to realize the real value of what you've done. That is a huge vulnerability, because I've met so many avoid improvisers who have said, you know, why didn't I get that promotion? I've got more attributes, more experience than the person who got the job, and I was overlooked. Well, a lot of it is because of the lack of self-promotion. And so I will say, in all honesty, I've not found a strategy yet in all these years that I've found has successfully dealt with that issue. That's how significant that is, you know, for the avoid improvisers, like where they can say, no, it used to be me, but here's what I do to now do it more effectively. I know where people feel like they're just telling a story and not promoting, that helps. But man, this one's a tough one for that drive.
This is an engineer, and she's a same as Jennifer's ID 7672, and she really discovered that about herself, that if she really wanted to advance, she works for a very large corporation. If she wanted to advance, she needed to really get herself a little bit known and have her brand speak for herself. So what she discovered is that she could join networking groups that would in turn inform her of things that she could then bring back as information, and not so much talking about herself, but adding value and bringing information back to her team.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, Pam. All right. We already talked about that. Grant raised the comment before about the inertia, you know, when they're thinking and processing, how does that come across? And that is one of the vulnerabilities, that when you take time to think and process things, so you're not dealing with it off the cuff, how that comes across to others is it looks like you're either just trying to resist an issue, you know, you're procrastinating, you're disengaged, you've been offended. There's that silence and vacuum that can be very easily misinterpreted in a negative way by other people. Your seriousness, the fact that you are, you know, very logical and grounded and not emotional about things, can really flatten the excitement and energy of the improviser. And so it's a real leveler of energy around improvisers, and it can really cause dysfunction for an improviser. Like, I know there's times when you can come into a room and there's improvisers on the other side of the door, and you come in all excited to, you know, do whatever or say whatever you want to say, and you get a reaction of flat energy, and all of your excitement and enthusiasm just evaporates in a heartbeat. So there is, I think, something for the avoid improvisers to be conscious of where your energy's at. Doesn't mean you've got to be all animated, but if you are really flat yourselves, you know, just checking yourself on that for the effect it can have on the other people around you, especially in like a marriage or a family, let alone a team environment. Your energy can be, whilst it's not a driver for you, it can be a significant demotivator for other people. The other one I would call out is, it's similar to that, is very task focused rather than relationship focused. I actually just had a meeting last night with a young kid, a son of a friend of mine, who wanted some mentoring. And he said, what are the things you would point out to me for starting my career? And this was one of the points. He's an avoid improviser. And I said to him, you know, you won't need help becoming technically proficient. Like, you're going to go there automatically. That's your instinct to go there. He was a strong verifier. But when it comes to all of the soft skills, the EQ rather than the IQ, that's where you're going to need to put some more intentional effort, because your ID is more around the task than it is around the relationship. However, if you make relationships one of your tasks, you can get exceptionally good at the whole people side of life. Telling versus selling is another vulnerability. So it's the improviser that's engaging and interactive and tends to, it's not just that they upsell it, but they can make it sort of interesting engaging, interactive, and sort of encourage the person to buy in. Often the presentation style or communication style of the avoid improviser is one where they're just telling things. So it's very logical, very straight, very unemotional, but it can either put people to sleep or it can lack that motivating, rallying, inspiring side to it. And you can take the same presentation and have it told by a improviser, and it'll come across much more engaging. And it's just because of the different style. And I would encourage there's plenty of avoid improvisers that go and do storytelling or presentation courses to learn how, and experience how they come across and make those adjustments. You can do it. It's not that it's impossible to you, it's just not your instinct. But if you at least are aware of that as a vulnerability and start to put some energy into that space, it can really shift how effective you are in your communication. And the last vulnerability I would call out that I think is significant, again, either in a family type situation or in a work environment, is when we talk about motivating people by stick or by carrot, the avoid improviser is much more the stick than the carrot. So they're more into punishing than they are incentivizing and inspiring. And I would just, again, call that out as a vulnerability to be aware of that, if you were, I watch parents reprimanding children, and the avoid improviser will be like, okay, I'm going to punish you for doing that. And the improviser will be more trying to figure out how can they inspire and incentivize the child to show better behavior. That's just a difference in style coming from the difference in whether you're an improviser or avoid improvised drive. But punishing versus incentivizing, or the stick versus the carrot, is another vulnerability to be conscious of. And especially when you're leading teams, it's something you want to be really aware of. Let's quickly talk about the genius element of the drives. I just didn't realize the time, I apologize. So as I've done in previous weeks, I've spoken about a white belt level of genius and a black belt level of genius. White belt is more the sort of contribution that you might think as an avoid improviser, well, it's not that big a deal. Surely everyone can do that. And I've already mentioned this, but I'd call it out because it is something that all of us who are an improvised drive are in awe of, that you do this, and that is seeing the risks and the things that cause the pressure. And I think we tend to often highlight the risk element, but I want to, on this call, really highlight the pressure piece. I think there's way more items that cause pressure than there are cause risk, if that makes sense. Like, particularly when it comes to relationships, there's a lot of things that improvisers do that inadvertently put pressure on people that we don't see, because we think it's a challenge, we think it's exciting, we think it's fun. And if you can call it out, not as a criticism, but just saying, do you realize that this might be actually putting pressure on someone? Like, that for us is such a huge value proposition. That's the first one, is, identifying and then mitigating the risks and the things that cause pressure. The black belt one, which is, the one where we stand back and sort of go, how on earth do you do that? That is just incredible. I've got to say, it's delivery. The ability to deliver when it's either super emotional and dramatic, like the paramedics we're talking about, or the pilot when the plane's, got all engines on fire, and they stay calm and stay true to their role and don't get swept up in all of the hype and drama at the time, or there's no energy about it, and somehow you've got to muster your diligence to still do a great job, even though there's just nothing exciting about this task at all, but you still deliver to the highest quality. I can assure you, all of us improvisers looking at you, when we would have not been able to even function in that situation, we stand there and look at you in awe. But being the non-self-promoting people that you are, you don't make any big song and dance about it, so it may not even feel like a big deal to you. But I assure you, those of us looking from the other side stand there and sort of bow to you with the way you're able to deliver, no matter whether it's, crazy energy or no energy. You just stand and deliver. And the integrity of that, the credibility of that, and frankly, the safety and the security that we all get from you doing that is, something very precious and magnificent to us. So that's how I describe that genius element. Guys, I know we're out of time. Thank you for being on the call today. There are a few things I haven't covered in this conversation, so I will just quickly put them into a second recording and post them later today as well. Thank you for being on the call. We'll send out an agenda for next week's program. Hopefully you'll join us for the next round of webinars. I'm sure they'll be very exciting. And because we're doing live interviews, they'll be more interactive and I'm sure a lot of fun for everyone involved. Have a great day and thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.